Welcome back to Freightways Live. I'm Travis Ryan, Chief Product Officer, here today with Chris Arredondo at the 3PL Summit. Here to talk to you guys today about how to both identify and interpret new recurring revenue opportunities for brokers. Chris, how are you? Welcome.
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
For sure, for sure. Um, I think it's interesting as you and I were speaking earlier today about bridging the gaps between brokerage and software, how software companies look at recurring revenue, and traditionally brokers have more so been based on load count, margins, and growth. I think this is a really interesting conversation as I've been on both the broker side and the software side to talk about recurring revenue. Tell me a little bit about how you view recurring revenue and how you would define it inside of a brokerage operation today.
Yeah, kind of tying it a little bit to it, cross industry related here from like a software side and brokerage. I think it is a little different. I think in a brokerage today, when you think recurring revenue, it's more like your contracts, things that you've got, bigger, larger shippers, the things that are you're going to get like 20 loads a month based on whatever lane you've committed to in that volume. Um, and I think that's how a lot of brokers see it today. Now, a lot of freight is in the spot market, I would say. So it's really hard to like think about how can I make recurring revenue with my spot freight. It's very difficult. I think a lot of times people are still just booking loads and going, and at the end of the month they're at 350 loads, and then the next month, day one, it starts at zero. So it's very hard to keep that momentum going. And I think when you look at recurring revenue from a spot market side, it's really like identifying patterns, and figuring out what can you pre-book or book now to make sure that revenue is going to keep recurring every month, month one, two, three, and so on and so forth. And I think here from a software company perspective, we look at MRR, I would say, and that's really revenue normalized on a monthly basis. And then there's ARR, right? There's revenue normalized on an annual basis. I think for a brokerage, it would really kind of determine or depend on what type of freight you actually have. I guess if it's true spot where it's like low lead time, very little forecasting involved,
Mhm.
probably going to want to look at something like MRR. But if you have like a mid to large shipper that's giving you overflow, maybe you can look at ARR for that specific account. I think it's important to identify which one you're gonna be looking at, just so you can set yourself up for success there.
Well, you mentioned freight patterns. How do you identify freight patterns to determine if it's ARR or MRR, or maybe it doesn't fit at all? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I think a little bit further along in my career, I had an opportunity to run a brokerage, and we had a lot of customers that would send us load offers. We were one of the 100 on the email blast, and we had the ones where like, oh man, we can't even compete in that market, so don't even quote it. And then we had some that were like giving us an opportunity first, right? Like the top three that would always reply to those emails, that would always at least try to bring an option to that customer. And what we would notice is, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we would get a load offer, whether it was like at 2 p.m., 11 a.m., or whatnot. But it was always a pattern. There's always a pattern there in a day of the week. Sometimes, like I just mentioned, the time of the day. What we started to look at was actually, charting that, and understanding the pattern, like not just from a load level or a customer level, but from a lane level. Because your carriers are more than likely, if it's a load to West Texas, let's just call it Houston to West Texas, they're probably going to take multiple types of freight out there. And it's important for like your company to understand your lane density as well. So whenever you're looking at these freight patterns, what carriers are you going to go to actually stage? So I think in terms of freight patterns from a shipper perspective, it's more analyzing that at a higher level rather than just a load, one load at a time.
You mentioned I was going to bring it up, and you brought it up. You brought up the carrier side. I'm thinking, as I'm thinking about making recurring revenue the shippers is part of the equation, maybe half of the equation, but I would feel like the carrier part may be the most important part of the equation. Are there things that brokerages can do working in the spot market with carriers, even though there may be, some cyclic behavior into it or some repeat patterns, to be strategic and work with these carriers to give them advance notice of loads that may be coming? Is that, or how would you go about best utilizing practices to give carriers notice so that when the freight does come, they're basically, prepared for it?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we did, right? We were not too big of a shop. Probably had about 6 reps as far as coverage side goes, and maybe about 6 other on the customer side. So we had to make the most use with what we had. Very lean, I would say. So yeah, no, that you're right. The carriers were the lifeline and the backbone of making that recurring revenue happen. So what we would do is, after you've charted out your freight patterns, whether that's in Excel or whatever you want to use, you can even literally draw it if you wanted to, and finding out, highlighting the days that are the most frequent. Then you would go to your carriers, find out from those guys, how often are they running that lane? Find out where they are every day, how often they're going there, what other freight are they taking out there, and then you're kind of staging that capacity in that carrier, and capturing all that information rather than just like booking one load at a time. I think some bad habits out there are, when a rep books a load, they're just like, hey, yeah, do you have that load or that truck in Chicago? No, okay, bye. And it's a very transactional conversation where, when you look at recurring revenue and these pre-booking tactics, it really takes a lot of carrier relationship building. And as you're building out those relationships, you start to learn this information from these carriers. But you should always have a place to chart that, just as you're charting your freight patterns. So then you can sync them up and marry them together and start to offer things to your customers, right? Or not things, but capacity. You're staging it in a way to where you can say, hey, Mr. Customer, I have a regular carrier that runs this 3 times a week. What rate do I need to be at to take that load, right? And then, of course, there's going to be times when maybe take one of these spot customers. They're like, yeah, we just don't know when we're going to get that freight. It's really based on the job and the buyer and all these other spot elements, I guess. So, at that point, it's really important to have a strong relationship with your carriers, making those arrangements, and letting them know, being super transparent, like, hey, I may or may not get this load, but let's work out a deal to where, like, can you hold your truck for me today? I'll give you a call by 8 a.m. tomorrow. If I don't have that load, I'll pay you a tonu. Or, like, if I don't have it by a certain time, let's just handshake agreement that, like, no harm, no foul. I'll help you find another load. Once you've got those relationships with your carriers, you can go back to your customers and think about that. Like, what's the margin going to be on that load and what's the loss going to be? A lot of times if you're risking that tonu of $150 or $250, a lot of times you're going to be making more money than that on the loads you actually do get. So if you're making revenue, if you're making margin, and you're serving that carrier and that customer, it's going to be a much better relationship and just long-term strategy rather than just like booking one load at a time, being reactive to the loads that come through, and really like charting this stuff out and staging your carriers in capacity like that. Your carriers are gonna appreciate that. It's gonna go a long way.
So it seems like step one is identifying patterns, and like obviously using that data to be able to go to step two, which is talking to your carrier base to show them the patterns, to show them the frequency, work with them on getting kind of prearranged capacity. Step three seems like the most important part, going back to your customer and letting them know that you see patterns where maybe they do or they don't. And then working that engagement or that relationship to make sure that they're going to make you, kind of first in line, first opportunity. Are there times where the customer is unaware of the patterns? Is some of this almost like a consultative approach where you can say, hey, we don't know if you're aware, but in these lanes on these days, and we'd like to help set up a program. Like, does the word program come into place, or help our users kind of understand what kind of language or what kind of the ways that you go to these customers to look at more than just being a freight broker, but being a true partner Is that something that happens? And if so, how would you suggest our listeners, best utilizing that approach?
Yeah, exactly. So I've seen a lot of agents at some larger companies like Global Transer, for example. They have that sophisticated technology to kind of make those predictions and understand those patterns, where they can build out a program. And that's when you think about like a customer rep today or a broker, like it's not everybody can find anybody can find a truck and a rate. It's really about that relationship, right? Just as well as the carrier side, just as much on the customer side. And when you're helping them identify those patterns, it does go a long way. It does help. Not often do they. I mean, they're in the same camp as you, right? They've got the spot freight that they're just trying to cover too. And if you're able to work together, show them kind of like, hey, if you book with me these 30 loads, like, or we understand that you only have 24-hour lead time at 2 loads a week minimum, but maybe there's 5 maximum. Let's work out a rate to where like every time you get that load, you can send that to me. There's some. I'm out of Texas here, and there's a lot of pipe moving back and forth. So there's a lot of facilities, and that was one of the examples that we did. We identified some strong patterns, regularity, and found that benchmark rate that we need to be at, and they can be at, that's still palatable for everybody, and run it like clockwork at that time. So it's not a lot of times do they know like what's their maximum, what's their minimum. Shippers work on a budget, so they're just trying to get everything out at the lowest cost possible. And so if you're able to bring some of that information to them and educate, right? Like I it's important that everybody is learning at the same time. You're not just booking a load, right? And it's really powerful. Yeah, I would say. I mean, not just in my experience that I've done it, but I've seen a lot of post articles and things about how these larger companies are able to do that with their technology.
You mentioned benchmark pricing, benchmarked rates. That's something we're big on here at Freight Waves. We obviously sell those. How do you angle that? Is that when you talk about a benchmark, do you mean a conversation that you're having with the shipper, the carrier, or both? Talk to me about how using that sounds. It sounds again consultative in approach. It sounds like you're establishing a norm, but how do you actually do that with the client or the carrier?
I would say there are a lot of rating tools out there. There are a lot of carriers. There's not going to be a better rate out there than the one that the carrier gives you. At the end of the day, that's going to be the one. That's the rate in hand that you're going to have to really work with. I would say, just a little bit about our customers. They're able to use the tools that we provide them to understand lane density, their carrier mix, their carrier makeup, how many carriers they have at any given time to cover a lane, and then use a price to see like kind of benchmark what's today going for, what was that lane going for last month, historically what's the lowest rate, what's it going to go for next month, and kind of find a middle ground between the rates with the carriers at $300, whatever it is. If they find a regular carrier that runs a lane daily, they can have that rates, and then see what the market's at, then go to the customer and say like, hey, if this is where we're at on, we've got 4 carriers committed for every week, what kind of rate do we need to be at with you? And if that works for them, right? Well, it's a quick win. It's all about recurring revenue, what you can do to book in volume rather than one load at a time. So I would say that's probably a way and a method that they could do. I've done it. A lot of our customers have done it, and it's good strategy to put in place if you're especially talking about recurring revenue, trying to figure out how much you're gonna actually pull in next month, and have a middle ground or a ground of like, hey, at least I've got 10 grand to start with. I'm not starting from zero. So
So, and that kind of leads into my last question is how does someone measure success? Like, how do I know if I'm being successful in improving both identifying opportunities as well as executing on net recurring revenue opportunities? How do I win?
how do we win? Scratch a lottery ticket. No. I mean there is a lot of risk, in doing something like this, but the reward is definitely going to outweigh that. And I would say it's not going to happen every time, but Most of the time it would, and you really, you want to set like the minimum requirements. Like, does is this shipper really? Is this someone I want to work with? Right? Like, you don't want to go through all these hoops and hurdles for someone that's, just treating you like, the transaction, right? So I think there's some of the culture and your brand and how it's going to impact your company and your carriers. Like, some of that is definitely going to go into it. But once you kind of have that baseline, I would say, looking back, it's hard to forecast. But once you have the data of 30 days ago or 60 days ago, now you can start to say like, wow, I actually made an extra, I don't know, $50,000 in revenue. Maybe the margin was skinny, but hey, that's revenue you wouldn't have had otherwise, right? And at the same time, you've expanded your carrier base, or you've created more stickiness with your carriers, and you're able to pre-book revenue where your reps aren't coming in day one of March and they're starting at $0. It's not fun. You gotta start all over again. So if you're able to pre-book that revenue, it's gonna help with a lot. I mean, even including your forecasting or growth too, right? Like, if you're forecasting that you're gonna have at least 10 grand minimum, then you can start to do more with that margin, with that revenue. You can hire, you can invest in technology, you can explore other strategies to take some more risks with that revenue and see what other patterns you can find. That's what I would say. It's really, they're all the soft ROIs and those types of things like carrier stickiness, but at the same time, once you actually do it, you'll start to see the results. Lower cost per load, lower touch, carrier service levels are going to go, extremely up. So a lot of things there.
Awesome. Well, great, Chris. That was great. Anything else you want to share today?
Uh, no, I guess just a little bit about our company.
Sure.
My name's Chris. I'm co-founder and VP of pretty much everything customer related here at Cargo Chief. We're a software company. We help brokers pre-book more freight, expand their carrier base, and automate those, I guess, redundant tasks that no one likes to do. Um, so we do that through our tool called C4. It's more of like a project and procurement software, kind of an all-around tool with carrier expansion, pricing capabilities, and automation as well. So pretty good tool. Love if anyone has any questions or wants to sync up later. I'm sure Travis will be sharing some information out. If not, you can catch me on LinkedIn too. Oh, and hey guys, if you want to learn more about us and Cargo Chief and how C4 can help your company, stop by and visit our virtual booth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and C4, as Chris mentioned, is their new platform, which is, I think it's an interesting spin and twist on some of the other technology that we've seen in the space before. And so I think, I'm glad that you brought it up because I was going to at least mention it. But you guys should check out C4. It's designed specifically for brokers to both improve workflow, find more carriers, reduce the cost of carrier sourcing, and help kind of create the back end for a recurring revenue model. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, a lot of our customers, have done this. It's interesting to see the range of roles and jobs that a broker has these days, where there are specific sourcing teams that focus on this stuff. There's pricing teams, there's carrier reps, customer reps, account managers, everything, right? And so I think the more information you can give them to make a better decision is going to yield a better result. So yeah, absolutely.
Using software to help create recurring revenue for a brokerage, right? I think they go hand in hand. Maybe not necessary, but probably pretty dang important to make it happen. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, yeah. I wish I had
Awesome.
software instead of like identifying. I literally had an Excel sheet. I started drawing and I was like, this is taking way too long. So I went to
Yeah.
Excel, did a grid, and like highlighted the days that were common. And we've kind of. I wish I had software to do that for me. Us, C4 today will help you make those decisions. But yeah, I totally wish I wasn't on chisel and slate back then.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Chris Arredondo, co-founder and head of marketing and customer success and everything he said customer related. Really appreciate your time today, and look forward to having you back in the near future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Travis.
And now back to FreightWaves Live for more awesome content here at the 3PL Summit. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.